Hello all, so this is part 2 of my mini solid wood workbench build, and this video will focus on building the cabinet. It's a bit of a present to myself this, so I put a bit of effort in to make it look kind of nice rather than my usual workshop lash-ups. But nothing as compared to some of the amazing Iroko benches you see on YouTube. It's quite an involved build though, and as such a longish video, but hopefully you'll grab a cuppa and settle in for some good old woodworking. Having you along is genuinely appreciated. These elm boards then have been planed to a thickness of about 12.4mm. This is to allow a good fit in housings. I'll later machine with a standard 12.7mm router cutter. A lot of imperfections in the boards, cracks and the like, so this is an ideal way to use them up. All the waney edges removed, I arrange out the varying width boards into rough panel sizes. Arranged just to minimise colour variation, or so they sort of graduate to the spalting like on the larger back panel. Then glue and clamp. I don't use a lot of force clamping panels. If your mating edges are good, you shouldn't need to, just enough to get a little squeeze out. Here's the panel out of the clamps then. I've given them a light rub down to remove any remaining glue. Now on to squaring and sizing. These are going to get moved around and used for sizing a lot as the build goes on, so I ease over the edges, particularly the end grain, to help stop any edges breaking. This is some Iroko, same stuff I used for the vice jaw in part 1. The large piece is to be a drawer front. I'm ripping it down to my planer max width, 240mm, and between it, the panels and the already made top, measurements from these will guide the sizing of the main cabinet frame. I made no drawings or plans to work from, just a rough idea in my head, letting the material lead the way. It's nice to work like this sometimes. It's a funny wood, Iroko. It seems to really only like being planed in one direction. Most wood is like that actually, something you notice much more hand planing, but yeah, Iroko really lets you know, by machine or by hand, by furring up if going the wrong way. So with the rough panels, drawer front and bench top done, I have my dimensions for the frame proper. I'm using your standard square edge 2x3 pine. Of the 4 pieces delivered to me, 2 were pretty straight, the other 2 complete bananas. The clamp on the miter saw helps reduce the bend a bit for a decent cut. 4 legs, each made up of 2 pieces of 2x3 perpendicular to each other, just glued, no screws. The remainder of the 2x is ripped in half to make the rails, the cross supports between the legs. The marks I'm laying down here are mainly to position mortises. I'm wrapping them right around as they're also a guide for the internal radii to be added later and give me a visual aid when routing housings. This is one of the 90-degree curve templates for my chairs I'm using to rough out the radii. As I pan up the leg there, you can see there's a bit going on. It's like this on both sides of the leg too, on each leg. The rails are going to be tenoned into the legs. I score with a marking gauge to help the shoulder cut stay clean. As I said in one of my recent videos making a footstool, I don't really like the miter saw for cutting tenons, but I still haven't replaced those broken Daisuke and tenon saws yet. I've really got to get on that, something that makes itself more evident later. Still, unlike the footstool, this isn't furniture, so miter saw will do just fine. The melamine bottom and rear help create an all-round consistent surface, as well as zero clearance at the rear. Tenon's done, it's on to the mortises in the leg. These I do at my routing machine, stop set to size the mortise. There's going to be quite a lot of routing in this video, those machines don't quit in my workshop. So there's a rough fit together where we're at so far. This just allows me to check fitment and jot down final sizes for the panels, drawer and shelves. I suppose this would be the point that a sensible person would glue up, bolt the top on and call it a bench. I'm not a sensible person, so I'm far from finished. The legs and rails need housings for the panels and rebates for the shelves. I'm doing the panel housings in the legs here. The final housing depth will be 5 or 6mm, but I'm routing about 26mm deep here as 20mm of material will be removed later to create a radius at the joints. Much easier to machine now while I have flat surfaces to support the router. Pretty happy with that fit. It's a good fit but loose enough for unimpeded movement. Here I have the smaller rails clamped up for machining the shelf rebates and panel housings. Bit tricky with the big router gliding over them. I should say here that this isn't the only thing going on in the shop, which is rendering my router table out of action for this project. Hence why you're seeing me plunge routing along a tightrope. In case it's not obvious, the top guide on the bandsaw is high here to clear the L shape on the legs as I remove the waste to achieve my curvy bits. Ideally, of course, you'd have it a lot lower to the material. Templates back out again to guide the router for the internal radii. Don't know about you, but I do love a shot of the cutter chomping away at material like this. So satisfying. To make the blends a bit easier once I've glued up, I'm removing some of the thickness with a block plane. In my infinite wisdom, I decided to dovetail the top of the legs into the workbench top. Dovetail bit in my routing machine, I'm essentially freehanding it, working to pencil marks on the top of the legs. The bit removes the waste well enough and the machine steady enough to allow me to accurately follow my pencil lines. I've lots of videos on this routing machine on my channel if you want to see more, by the way. The machine already set up such as it is, I set to routing the dovetails into the drawer box side. Going with one large one as firstly, it's easier, and secondly, it means I can position it so the housings for the runners and drawer bottom don't interfere with the pins. Remember when I mentioned broken handsaws earlier when I was miter sawing tenons? Well, all is not lost. Clearing out one of my on-site kit bags, I found this hideous condition Irwin tenon saw. Good lord, it's awful. Nevertheless, it did save the day, allowing me to cut the socket shoulders on the rear panel for the drawer box. I then route out most of the waste. I then just used a chisel to nick away the remainder against the shoulders. Next up, still on the drawer box, I'm routing the housings for the runners. 12.7mm twin flute bit with a fence set on the machine. The drawer bottom is going to be 12mm ply, so I've swapped to a 6mm bit, doing a double pass to give me a precise 12mm slot. Here's said 12mm ply getting cut for the drawer bottom and the shelves. In case anyone's wondering why I'm using the rail square rather than the rail hinge I made for this MFT bench, it's simply because this piece of rail has been out and about a bit recently and I just haven't reattached it to the bench. Along with some new handsaws, another piece of short rail is on the shopping list. Didn't film me doing it, but same processes you've seen already applied to the drawer front to create the dovetail socket and drawer bottom housing. I figured a drawer pull would get in the way, so I just opted for a hole. It's centred from the top of the drawer bottom as opposed to bottom of the drawer front to the top. 3mm pilot hole right through, then 40mm Forstner from each side. Bosch. Hole gets a round over, as does the rest of the drawer front. Then all the drawer pieces get a bit of a sand. Just going to 120 grit, no need to overdo it for a workbench, he says. I don't do many drawers these days. I seem to have locked away in my brain somewhere how much work making drawers can be. I'm using Cascamite to glue all the bench cabinet pieces together. Few reasons for this. It has good gap filling properties and, in order to help with assembly, I've done possibly half the mortises a slightly loose fit. Cascamite will give the looser joints a good bond regardless. Plus, as it's like wallpaper pasting consistency, it doesn't run like your more common wood glues or epoxies. This will give me some control, keeping housings clear of glue that might interfere with the panels moving. It's a super solid bond too, one that will hold up well on a bashing bench. It's more important than most to clean up the squeeze out with this glue. Kind of dries like a glass and is not easily removed if you missed a drip. The last benefit of it, in this instance, is it gives a good working time. You've got easily 10 minutes to mess about, maybe up to 20 depending on conditions. Ideal for a one and done drawer glue up like this. With a radiused mortise and tenon joint, I can round the corners of the panels. This will also help keep any glue squeeze out away from them. As ever with me, rounding continues with every other piece. Little 6mm round for all the internal edges, large 25mm round for the outside corner of each leg. Unlike with my furniture, where inside, outside, underside, etc. all gets the same level of attention to detail, I'm only softening the edges of the face pieces on this bench. You've got to draw the line somewhere. I haven't bothered to show it, but these first 2 rail pieces that go in, I make sure they're clear of glue around the housing, then slot in the panel. Obviously I've little control over the glue squeeze out when I fit the other leg. I'll make sure the panel is seated biased to this side so it can expand, if it needs to the known glue-free side. But the rounded panel corners will help here. Very pleased seeing them come together at this point. I really like the look of the elm panels against the pine with all the rounds, just like I'd imagined in my head. I forgot to include that I'd oiled the panels before glue up, using the same IKEA oil I used for the top. Not a massive fan of it, but to be fair, I do like the colour it's brought out the elm and Iroko on this bench. Nice to see the contrast of the Iroko against the elm pop out with a bit of oil on the drawer. I wanted to wait until the sides were glued before marking and chopping out for the draw runners, just to be sure all was even. Nice fit, they then get glued and pinned in place. Time to make the cabinet whole then, fitting the front and rear rails and the back panel. Same process as with the sides you've just seen me do. All together and glue dry, I can finesse the blends a little. Again, I'm giving each joint way more attention than a workbench deserves, but nothing like that my furniture gets. Just a general smoothing over up to 120 grit again. Looks and feels quite nice though. Then a more general sand of the faces. Hang in there folks, I'm at the finishing touches now. On the ply shelves, I need to nibble away a bit at each corner. I didn't properly scribe these, just took some measurements and winged it really. Not my neatest work, but fits, and dust down the years will hide my sins. So here I have the bench top, vice removed, upside down on my machine to route out the dovetail sockets for the legs. There's sort of 2 parts to each socket, an open, undovetailed section flowing into a dovetailed section toward the front. Same at the rear, except that the open section runs right out the back. They're kind of like a keyhole slot if you like. I use a straight flute to remove most of the waste first, then swap to a dovetail bit to add the bevels, doing this by eye to a pencil line again. Sorry about these shots by the way, I did try having the camera lower but my arm got in the way. High like this, my head gets in the way, but I'm sure you get the idea of what's going on. With those milled, I can have the base in place and pre-drill for a screw behind each front leg. Be in no doubt, the fit is really snug, but adding a screw at the front is just a bit of reassurance against it moving around long term after me bashing about on it. The rear legs remain unscrewed to allow for any movement in the top. One last feature to add to complement the front vise is a series of holes down one of the legs. These will give me a sort of dead man function for larger work holding. I'm using an old strip of MFT top to template for 20mm holes. As always in my tiny shop, it's important for everything to be movable, so I fit some kick down bench wheels. No footage of me fitting them as I filled my SD cards at this point, but they're really simple. Screws at something like 50 and 120mm, then attach the wheels to the mount. Done. I wanted to put some sort of finish on the pine frame, but really didn't want to use the usual oils, as the orangey colour it turns pine is, to me, awful. Thankfully, Keith Rag and Bone Brown has just released his clear wood wax, so I purchased a tin to give it a whirl. As I wax the runners there, you can see on the front of the left leg where I've applied the wax compared to the side where I haven't. As this stuff dries though, it all returns to looking untreated. Marvellous stuff. Nice and smooth too. Good work, Keith. The shells I glue and screw on. Screws because I'm in no mind to wait for the glue to dry at this point. The shelves also got the IKEA oil treatment, and I found this turned the colour not too dissimilar to the elm. Nice. Drawer in, I can get the top fitted at long last. As I found earlier when it was upside down getting drilled for the screw holes, it's much easier to remove it than to put it on. It took about 10 minutes of hammer action to get it seated where I wanted it. I had to turn to a bigger hammer and block of wood and all. Still, it got there. Lovely and solid, just the 2 screws on the front legs to finish. There we are, little twirl for the good folks at home. I'm pretty stoked with the way it looks, I have to say. Although as always with my poor photography, it looks so much better in person than I'm able to show you. Really like the contrast of the panels and the top to the frame. Despite the size of the leg frame, once dropped off its wheels, it's really stable and solid, due in most part to the sheer weight of the thing, a real dead weight. The eagle-eyed amongst you may have spotted the bottom shelf below the drawer has drawer runners. I did want 2 drawers, but didn't have enough Iroko. Next time I'm at the merchants, I'll see if they've any more board ends so I can make the second. At least the runners are there, saving me a pain down the line. Never know, I might decide it's just better as a shelf. Any of you that watched part 1 where I made the top will know I added 20mm dog holes to a section of the top and vice jaws, plus there's a tool slot in the top. My long guardrail dogs have plenty on them to clear the bench top overhang and catch work for support. These have no problem holding a good deal of weight too. Point of note on this, if you want to do something like this with dogs, make sure your long dogs aren't the ones with tapered ends. They really won't work for something like this. While I drop some glamour shots, let me just quickly answer some comments I've had since doing the bench top vid. Firstly, someone asked where I find the time. Well, I don't. 2 years it's taken me to get round to making this, and I've chiselled away at it evenings, weekends, between glue ups and finishing processes and all that. I never just have the one thing on the go. Another was why I need this when I already made the MFT style one you've seen me use in this video. Well, the MFT one is an assembly and saw bench. Its clamping options make it amazing for these things. This new solid wood bench is what I'll use for chiselling work and hammering stub and joints together, for planing too. Its mass makes it ideal for this, whereas the MFT top just bounces around, being only 18mm MDF. In case anyone's interested in terms of how much it cost, well, I already had the elm and Iroko. The only wood I bought was the pine 2x3s that cost about 45 quid. The Axminster quick release vice cost about 114 and the kickdown wheels 44. So a little over £200 altogether. That about covers it, I think. I'll put a link to part 1 where I made the bench top at the end. I'll also create a playlist for the bench builds that cover this one and my MFT style bench if you'd like to see more. I'd love to know what you think of this endeavour below, so please comment away or ask any questions if I've missed anything. I do enjoy engaging with your comments. Like, sub and donate via the thanks button below if you feel so inclined, and if nothing else, if you've made it this far, thanks for watching.